We're so grateful that you're with us for the big questions. How is peace possible in today's world, with Shahin Goddousi from the Baha'i Faith and Reverend Mark Burnham from Presbyterian Faith. As interfaith councils, we understand land acknowledgements as a transformative act meant to confront our place on native lands and to build mindfulness of our present participation in colonial legacies. As people of various faith traditions and life philosophies, we affirm our responsibility to amplify Indigenous voices. We stand in solidarity with local Indigenous communities, and we respect local Indigenous protocol. We practice these land acknowledgements in order to teach and promote greater public consciousness of native sovereignty and cultural rights, even here in California, where there are first few nations that survived the California Indigenous genocide and fewer still that gained federal recognition as sovereign nations, including our Ohlone siblings that are seeking federal recognition for the Molucme Ohlone peoples. And Sarah Blackstock will get us going.
Yes. Welcome to you, adventurers and explorers of life's big questions. This year, we are exploring answers to our big question of 2022. How can there be peace in today's world? Or as one of the participants wanted to rephrase it, peace is possible in today's world. Thank you to Susie Cole, President of the Interfaith Council of Rossmore, and to the Big Questions Committee, Gloria Sunshine, Ruth Ahern, and Channing Miller. We much appreciate Will McGarvey, who you just heard, Executive Director of the Contra Costa Interfaith Council, who generously has hosted us throughout the pandemic period. And also thanks to Rossmore Channel 28 for recording this session. It will be presented on Channel 28 in Rossmore within the next few months. Also, Will makes a recording that can be found on YouTube. Maybe, Will, you would put that in the chat box where they can find that on YouTube. Thank you. So instead of thinking of peace as one unified topic, it occurred to me that it can be looked at through several different lenses. Peace as a personal experience, a philosophic foundation, a psychological exploration, a social or communal experience, or a spiritual reality. One dictionary definition of peace is freedom from disturbance, civil disorder, dissension, anxiety, stress, or turmoil. But these are negative definitions. Peace is freedom from these things. Some positive definitions of peace might be a state of friendliness, detachment, reconciliation, redemption, a state of balance, wholeness, or oneness with all, or internal coherence. I would like to think that all of us have experienced peace on a personal level, at least a little bit of it. Like when walking through a forest, sitting by a quiet creek, listening to the birds, or breathing with the lapping of the ocean waves. When the psychologist Carl Jung visited the Taos people in the pueblos of New Mexico, he was curious about their seeming to be such a peaceful people. He asked their chief, Mountain Lake, how it was that they were so peaceful and friendly. He answered, "We do not think with our heads like the white man. We think with our hearts." It seemed that each member of the community experienced a vital personal mystery within, and this created a communal peace without. Regarding the issue of peace in the world, let us listen to the viewpoints of today's two speakers. Our first speaker is Shahin Goddousi, representing the Baha'i faith. Shaheen grew up in the Bay Area. His educational background is in medical research. Currently, he lives in Fairfield, where he serves as an elected officer of the local spiritual assembly, an institution established by the Baha'i faith, by Baha'u'llah, for peace and tranquility of mankind. He is a proud uncle of two nieces who live in Texas, whom he loves dearly. Shaheen, so good to have you and welcome.
Thank you for having me. Before I begin, I have a question. Is it possible for me to do a screen share when that's needed?
Will?
Yep, you're all set now.
Okay, thank you. So before I start my general talk, there is an actual prayer revealed by Abdul-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, to America when he was here in the United States a little over 100 years ago. And it actually, in this prayer, it talks about the qualities of America, and it's actually in relation to peace. So I thought it would be very appropriate to share this prayer, if you don't mind. O thou kind Lord, this gathering is turning to thee. These hearts are radiant with thy love. These minds and spirits are exhilarated by the message of thy glad tidings. O God, let this American democracy become glorious in spiritual degrees, even as it has aspired to material degrees, and render this just government victorious. Confirm this revered nation to upraise the standard of the oneness of humanity, to promulgate the most great peace, to become thereby most glorious and praiseworthy among all the nations of the world. O God, this American nation is worthy of thy favors and is deserving of thy mercy. Make it precious and near to thee through thy bounty and bestowal.
Thank you, Shaheen.
Okay. So what I've done is I've created a compilation of the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha, and a little bit of Shoghi Effendi, who is the guardian of the Baha'i faith, in terms of what the Baha'i, as this topic is, the Baha'i perspective of world peace. And it was mentioned that, this is a pretty big topic and it can have many facets. But I thought I would start with the role of religion with peace in general. And so here's a writing from Baha'u'llah that explains just that. So, this is an interfaith panel and we all have various faiths and religions, but there's a commonality actually to all of them. And the Baha'is believe that all of the world's great religious teachers, these divine teachers, are sent by the same source, the same God, who is gradually revealing his will to mankind in our own capacity. So in the capacity for us to be able to put his words into actions. And so peace has always actually been one of the prime reasons for God for unfolding his message. And as our capacity as humans to attain peace grows, so does God's revelation for us. And so the first quote that shows this is right here, where it says, and this is penned by Baha'u'llah, and he says that the purpose of religion, as revealed from the heaven of God's holy will, is to establish unity and concord amongst the peoples of the world. Make it not the cause of dissension and strife. The religion of God and his divine law are the most potent instruments and the surest of all means for the dawning of the light of unity amongst men. The progress of the world, the development of the nations, the tranquility of peoples, and the peace of all who dwell on earth are among the principles and ordinances of God. Religion bestoweth upon man the most precious of all gifts, offereth the cup of prosperity, imparteth eternal life, and showereth imperishable benefits upon mankind. It behooveth the chiefs and rulers of the world, and in particular the trustees of God's house of justice, to endeavor to the utmost of their power to safeguard its position, promote its interests, and exalt its station in the eyes of the world. In like manner, it is incumbent upon them to inquire into the conditions of their subjects and to acquaint themselves with the affairs and activities of the diverse communities in their dominions. We call upon the manifestations of the power of God, the sovereigns and rulers on earth, to bestir themselves and do all in their power, that haply they may banish discord from this world and illumine it with the light of concord. So we can either have questions now or at the end. If there's any questions about the paragraph itself, then please just speak the question, because each of these has one can really dive into and gain gems over and over. What I'm going to do is I'm going to explain just a little bit about who Baha'u'llah is, because his revelation is actually tied with what he calls the coming of the most great peace. And so Baha'u'llah, who in the middle of the 19th century said that he was summoned by God with a new message, he actually wrote to the kings and tablets. He wrote tablets to the kings and rulers of the world during imprisonment of all times. And to these rulers, including, for example, Queen Victoria, he laid down the requisites of peace. One of the famous quotes in the Baha'i writings is that Baha'u'llah says that peace is impossible until our unity is firmly established. And the requisite of our unity is the love for one another, which is obvious, but it's also the love of God. And it comes with three realizations. Our oneness, which is the oneness of, the first oneness is the oneness of God, that all the revelations of God are from the same source, which is God. The second is the oneness of man. And the third is the oneness of religion, which is essentially the same as the first one. So if we understand that God is one, that man is one, and that all the religions agree, then we actually have the requisites for peace. We will have the raw ingredients. Among these requisites is this understanding of an art called consultation, in which Baha'u'llah taught us to consult with one another in all endeavors. And he taught that this consultation begins at home. So even within the family unit, spouses need to consult with one another, with their children. Children need to consult with one another. In any endeavor, when we consult and we agree upon something, even if whatever we set out to do turns out to be incorrect, through consultation, through being united in that effort, whatever we realize that didn't come out correctly, that wrong will self-correct, and we can go forward in a new direction until we achieve the results that we want. Now, I'm saying this because this is in direct contrast with the current state of how world affairs, local affairs also are done. Right now, we know that, for example, since we live in America, in an American system of politics, things are done through lobbying. Things are done through the desire to advance an interest of a particular group, and that these groups will come together and somehow try to negotiate some type of a middle ground, which often requires a lot of compromises. And somehow this is deemed to be the best thing that people have come up with. And so there's an issue when we think about that, which is that it really isn't working very well. And the proof of that is that politically, America is divided, racially, America is divided, socioeconomically, America is divided. And these polarizations are only getting worse and worse. the chief instrument to be able to remedy this is, as Baha'u'llah says, consultation and compassion. And that we must actually be interested in what is best for us as a whole. And we must put our own personal desires, not even secondary, like, last. But this requires a particular faith, and especially when one can call it a faith in God, but really a faith that this is the system that is best for us, even as individuals. It requires maybe for some people a leap of faith to understand that the best way for a person to personally prosper is to actually not focus on our own prosperity, but rather to focus on the prosperity of those around us. This is a type of a shift in consciousness from being self-centered to being selfless service to humanity. Now, I ask you, do you think that the world leaders, if we had such high-minded world leaders, would that make a difference in our world affairs? And you guys, if you want, you can just nod yes or shake your head no, right? So, and especially right now, when we look at the state of what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, we see that there are really agendas that are at play, which have nothing to do with the prosperity of humankind, but their origin is a personal desire for glory, for example, or something. We don't know. We can't know what the mind of particular world leaders are, but whatever they are, we do know that they are in direct opposition to what the world needs right now. We also see that all the leaders of the world so far are just letting the particular happenings play out as they are, as if their hand is tied by some type of an invisible force. But what is that force that their hands are tied behind? It cannot be that there is no material means to stop what's happening. It's not like there is an actual physical inability by machinery or technology or other means. So it must be something else. It must be will. So now let's examine, why is there no will present to, for example, stopping this one person from trying to invade another nation for his own glorification or whatever, when there are so many surrounding nations around the particular country and other nations around? We even have something called the United Nations. What's going on? Why is it that if we have a United Nations, the world is still so divided? There must be reasons that the particular prerequisites that we've talked about have not been established. Is consultation being established? Do each of the countries have an equal say in what needs to be done? Are they looking out for their own affairs, or are they looking out for the well-being of all? And these are the questions we can ask. So Baha'u'llah says, and he revealed this, and again, in these tablets to the kings, he says something which is highly positive. He says that this is the day in which God's most excellent favors have been poured out upon men, the day in which his most mighty grace hath been infused into all created things. It is incumbent upon all the peoples of the world to reconcile their differences, and with perfect unity and peace, abide beneath the shadow of the tree of his care and loving kindness. It behooveth them to cleave to whatsoever will in this day be conducive to the exaltation of their stations and to the promotion of their best interests. Now, one thing that stands out for me is this idea of the exaltation of their stations. Baha'u'llah describes man as the supreme talisman. A talisman is a type of charm, something that might be worn, for example, on someone's neck to protect them from, let's say, mischief or evildoers or whatever. But rather than looking external, that we actually, if we were to recognize with what power and reason we were each individually called into being, you know, as it says in the Bible that man is created in the image of God, then we can understand, we can begin to understand our inherent nobility. And that each manifestation of God, each divine teacher of God has come to help us understand our own inherent nobility. This station, this exalted station, is a station that we must not allow anyone or anything to take away from us. All our exaltation comes from God. All abasement comes from our own selves. We have a twofold nature. We have our spiritual, aspirational nature, which is from our soul. And then we have our physical nature, our bodies, which belongs to the physical, the material world. In us are combined these two. If they are used in harmony, then we can achieve great results, both individually and collectively. In other words, if our spiritual side dominates our animal side, we can be likened unto saints. But if we allow our animal side to dominate our spiritual side, then we can become likened unto animals. But actually, we end up becoming worse than animals in action, because animals are always bound by the laws of nature and do things according to their own limitations. We have such a capability that if our animal nature were to dominate, we can actually destroy this very earth that's giving us our sustenance. So this is another reminder why the manifestations of God have all come. When they educate us and they allow us to reach that our highest potential, our exalted stations, then a natural byproduct of that actually is that peace will be inevitably attained without requiring any kind of a political will or anything else. This is something, for example, that it seems that the Native Americans inherently know. But this is not something that many groups seem to understand. So again, God needs to remind us through his different teachers that he sends to different parts of this planet, to different communities at different times, because he doesn't want to abandon anybody. He doesn't want to leave any person or group alone. He spreads his message everywhere, like light, a beacon of light that can envelop the entire planet. So this idea that I've talked about is actually called by Baha'u'llah the most great peace. And this most great peace is so lofty that we really cannot imagine or envision adequately right now what it is. What we can do is maybe get a glimpse of what it would look like. And in this paragraph, the guardian of the Baha'i faith describes it, Sholi Effendi. And he actually starts with very simple stuff like the elimination of certain negatives, but then he talks about the actual promotion of positives that the like of which we have not seen. And I'll go ahead and read that. And he says, national rivalries, hatreds, and intrigues will cease, and racial animosity and prejudice will be replaced by racial amity, understanding, and cooperation. The causes of religious strife will be permanently removed. Economic barriers and restrictions will be completely abolished, and the inordinate distinction between classes will be obliterated. And then he talks about the elimination of extremes. Destitution on one hand and gross accumulation of ownership on the other will disappear. The enormous energy dissipated and wasted on war, whether economic or political, will be, and I like this word, consecrated. Let's think about that. Consecrated to such ends as will extend the range of human inventions and technical development, to the increase of the productivity of mankind, to the extermination of disease, to the extension of scientific research, to the raising of the standard of physical health, to the sharpening and refinement of the human brain, to the exploitation of unused and unsuspected resources of the planet, to the prolongation of human life, and to the furtherance of any other agency that can stimulate the intellectual, the moral, and spiritual life of the entire human race. So it's not so much that God is sending his messengers simply to cure us from our ills. That is an essential thing of what they do. Each of God's manifestations are like divine physicians, and they take their pulse of humanity, they identify the disease of the time, and they prescribe a remedy. That prescription are the laws that they send out. But a physician, once they get you to health, they say, okay, you're good. Well, if we really think about it, there's more that we can achieve than just be healthy. And that is that we can actually be prosperous physically and mentally at an Olympic level, right? So imagine now humanity on an Olympic level. What does that mean? It means these things that has been outlined here. For example, this all the wasted economic resources right now that go to this war machine, however it originates. And it's not just economic war or political war. It's just any kind of strife that pits one organization to another. And sometimes it's the money that's spent is just advertising, for example. When it's time on particular times of year, how much money is spent on proposition this? One group will say vote yes, another group will say vote no. So much money is spent on campaigns and this and that. That's money that can be, this word again, consecrated to be used for much more lofty endeavors that speak to our own inherent nobility that God wants us to understand. That in turn will lead to further development of inventions, but not inventions that are destructive, but are constructive. All the inventions and technical development that will increase us to more productivity so that we don't have to work as much every day. To the extermination of disease. This is a strong word. This isn't to the prolonged treatment into chronic management of some kind of a disease, but rather it's eradication. To be able to find the root causes of each of our diseases, whether it's genetic or whether it's age related, it doesn't matter. All of these have the potential to be eradicated. This will be done through scientific research, which will lead to the raising of the standard of both our physical health and our mental health, including this sharpening and refinement of the human brain. We cannot imagine what children of the future will be able to learn at a younger age than we ever thought would be possible. But that's a part of the potentiation of humanity, that even our kids, and first of all, the requisite is they will be very polite, very high-minded, very mature-minded, thinking about service to others. And they will have minds that are equally capable of manifesting that goodwill. Those humans in which our generation, honestly, we don't seem to be fit to enter that because we are not so refined in our thinkings, even if we think we are. If they have, if they have long lives, it's not long lives for enjoyment of every day passing, and just, just for ease and contentment, but rather that prolongation is for service to each other. And they will in turn further any agency that will stimulate intellectual, moral, and spiritual life of our entire human race. With this in mind, everything else will naturally just dissolve because it becomes a non-issue. Certain things that we think are issues now will actually become moot.
Shaheen, can you bring your part of the talk to a conclusion so that we can have some questions or comments from the attendees?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So I would like to say is this one thing, if there's a take-home message, is that, as Baha'u'llah says, the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. This unity can never be reached so long as the counsels which we talked about, which the pen of the Most High have revealed, are suffered to pass unheeded.
Thank you.
While we get folks working on putting together some questions, there's one in the chat room there that might offer some context for folks.
Very good. Okay. So I can't see the chat room because the screen.
I'll get it here then. Can we have a small history of the Baha'i faith? I'm not familiar with this religion and its founding.
Very short, maybe within a minute, Shaheen.
Sure.
A brief history of Baha'i.
So Baha'u'llah was born in 1817 to a noble family in Persia, which is modern day Iran. And he showed at an early age signs that made him far distinguished from anybody else. He was able to understand things without going to school to such a degree that he just required no school. And this is something that's characteristic of all the manifestations of God. When Baha'u'llah was a young man, in 1844, someone by the name of the Bab, who is what Baha'is believe is the herald of Baha'u'llah, revealed himself as the gate of God, who has come to bring people to prepare people for the coming of, as the Bab described, him whom God shall make manifest. The one of two people that have been prophesied in all of the world's religions as coming to usher a new day. And so Baha'u'llah immediately accepted the message of the Bab. And in doing so, he was exiled, imprisoned for the remainder of his life. And one of the places that he was thrown into is called, in a prison in Tehran, it's called Siyah Chal, which means black pit, which was a cistern that was no longer used. It was an underground pit for sewage that had been converted into throwing people that had committed the most heinous crimes, murder, highway robbers, you name it. They would be thrown into this pit, black pit, with galling chains on their necks in hopes that they would just die. And Baha'u'llah says, as he was in that black pit, during the days I lay in the prison of Tehran, though the galling weight of the chains and the stench-filled air allowed me but little sleep, still in those infrequent moments of slumber, I felt as if something flowed from the crown of my head over my breast, even as a mighty torrent that precipitateth itself upon the earth from the summit of a lofty mountain. Every limb of my body would, as a result, be set afire. At such moments, my tongue recited what no man could bear to hear. So it was in that black pit in which he understood that he had been called by God to be the revealer of his new message.
Thank you, Shaheen, and thank you for your sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, as if we can have any questions or comments? We've got about 5 minutes and then we'll have our other speaker. That's good, from Dick Powell to everyone. We must change from gross national product to gross national happiness in our goal. Thank you, Dick. That's very good. I think Finland and let me see, Finland and Denmark and maybe Bhutan rate very high on the scale of the gross national happiness. They're the people are the happiest people in those countries in the world. And there are reasons for that, but let's not take any more time for that. So any other questions or comments? That was a good one.
It does make it easier for us if anyone can use the little reactions in the raise hand function, because that makes it easier for us to actually see who's raising their hand if you'd like to go. But if you want to just unmute yourself and start talking right now, we can have some responses.
So Will, can we
Questions.
take down the screen that's up there now so we can see each other?
Yes, a good stop share. Okay.
Oh, good. There we go. Great. Okay, so you all understand about putting your hand. Okay, well, Gloria Sunshine has her hand up, and so does Robert Ash. Go ahead, Gloria.
Well, I just wondered on the history, did he ever get out of the black pit?
Oh,
And also, did he give any further directions of how to attain unity?
Yes to both questions. He got out of the black pit of Siachal, Tehran, only to be exiled successively further and further from Iran until he actually ended up in what he referred to as the most great prison, which is in Akka, which was part of the Ottoman Empire at the time, but is in modern day Israel.
Oh,
So he ended up from the black pit, which he refused to call the most great prison, into the most great prison. And yes, the second question, he actually wrote volumes and volumes of writings that deal with all manners of subjects. And chief of what he wrote is something called the Kitab-e-Aqdas, which means the most holy book. And in that book, he wrote the laws and ordinances for humanity for today. He prescribed obligatory prayer. He prescribed fasting. He blotted out anything that would cause dissension and strife amongst other teachings. He explicitly forbade slavery. He said that it does not beseemeth man who is himself a servant to take upon himself another servant. And by that means that we are all servants of God. He actually laid a charter for a world order, as his own says, the like of which humankind has never seen. He resolved the seemingly disparative issues between different religions by showing how they connect and why each of these great teachers prescribed laws that they did for their time. And I can put maybe in this chat a link to where one can read the writings of Baha'u'llah online.
thank you. That would be a good thing to do. People could take that and write it down. So next question, Robert Esch.
Thanks, Shaheen. I have a comment and a question.
Sure.
So it's pretty clear that with the world where it is now and our increased mechanical improvements, if you would say, weaponry, wars are almost suicidal. And I really appreciate your vision of a world government. But, human loyalties, once mobilized, are hard to change. The families originally had to give up some loyalty to the clans to the tribes to nations. But it's pretty hard to get from nations to world government. About the vision you have, what's the first steps to changing those loyalties to something broader, to higher visions? And if you could incorporate your answer with your idea that revelations are all from the same source, that we all have this kernel of truth.
I'm so glad that you asked that question. Are you frozen?
Yeah, he is frozen, but why don't you go ahead
Sure.
with the answer, and then we have to move on.
1912, in North America, actually, Abdu'l-Baha talks about this very same thing. He said, today, the world of humanity is in need of international unity and conciliation. To establish these great fundamental principles, a propelling power is needed. He says, it is self-evident that the unity of the human world and the most great peace cannot be accomplished through material means. They cannot be established through political power, for the political interests of nations are various and the policies of peoples are divergent and conflicting. They cannot be founded through racial or patriotic power, for these are human powers, selfish and weak. The very nature of racial differences and patriotic prejudices prevents the realization of this unity and agreement. Therefore, it is evident that the promotion of the oneness of the kingdom of humanity, which is essential to the teachings of all the manifestations of God, is impossible except through the divine power and breaths of the Holy Spirit. Other powers are too weak and are incapable of accomplishing this.
Excellent. Thank you. Through the power of the Holy Spirit.
That's right.
Thank you very much, Shaheen, and thank you for the questions, Sunshine and Robert S. So now, and we can have, if we have more time at the end, we can still continue with our comments and questions. Let's now go to our second speaker, Reverend Mark Burnham. The Reverend Mark Burnham has been an ordained Presbyterian minister for almost 30 years and currently serves as the pastor of Grace Presbyterian Church in Walnut Creek. He received a Master of International Business from the University of South Carolina and a Master of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary in Richmond, Virginia. Reverend Burnham has been involved in numerous community interfaith dialogues and is currently working to build the first micro-home affordable housing units in the city of Walnut Creek. Mark and his wife, Pat, moved to Rossmore in 2020, just as the pandemic started. They have 2 adult children who both live on the West Coast and now reside with their 2 dogs and 1 cat. We're probably a bit more peaceful than the kids. So thank you, Reverend Mark Burnham, for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks to the group and to the council for inviting me. It's great to be here. It's been a fun experience watching the previous speakers on the YouTube recordings. And Shaheen, thank you for your presentation today. It's there's some wonderfully broad and expansive views of peace, so it's been very helpful. Also a little intimidating when you come after about 7 or 8 different speakers. So I'm going to do my best. I'm going to be sharing my screen, so I'm going to put this up, and hopefully that works okay. And hold on 1 second. Let me play it here. All right, can you guys see that? That's okay. All right, good. So just briefly, a little background beyond what Sarah had mentioned there is, I'm turning my screen. So yes, I've been Presbyterian for 30 years as a pastor. I grew up though in the Catholic tradition, 12 years of Catholic schools. As I tell people, I didn't know there were other options. Everyone I knew was Catholic growing up in upstate New York. So I later married a Presbyterian, and through some difficult times, ended up getting connected with a Presbyterian church and ultimately getting into the ministry. And so just briefly, for folks who don't know, the Presbyterian Church USA is the denomination I'm part of. And it's got its roots back to Scotland, the Church of Scotland, and ultimately back to Geneva and to John Calvin and the Protestant Reformation. So there's often quite a bit of focus on kind of thinking. We're kind of a thinking focused faith often, so that may be reflected a little bit today. So I apologize if this is a little bit in your head rather than an emotional one, but that's kind of where Presbyterians often are. So, but let me go ahead and just talk a little bit about what I'm going to do today. There's going to be a song right at the beginning, and you'll be glad to know I am not going to sing that song. We have a recording of a choir. It comes from the Iona group. It's called the Wild Goose Worship Group, John Bell. So that'll start us off, hopefully set the mood. We'll talk a little bit about some different things around peace. And then at the end, there's also just a closing song. It's about 2 minutes, and then a closing prayer. So if nothing else, hopefully you'll get a couple of good songs you'll get to hear out of this presentation, and we can go from there. So let me go ahead and move to the next item. So this is the opening song. So let me go ahead and start this. The peace of the earth be with you, the peace of the heavens too. The peace of the rivers be with you, the peace of the oceans too. Deep peace falling over you. God's peace growing in you. The peace of the earth be with you, the peace of the heavens too. The peace of the rivers be with you, the peace of the oceans too. Deep peace falling over you. God's peace growing in you. So, answer the question. I thought about this, Sarah, after you had contacted me about it, and in my mind, the first iteration of the question I had from you is peace possible in the world? Which I think makes it a little easier because that's probably a yes or no question. And then I realized is how is peace possible in the world? And I think as we've heard through these presentations, that's a very, very difficult question to try to answer. So I'm decided I'm going to focus a little bit differently. And I'm going to look at this question is, what do we mean when we ask for peace? I heard it a little bit come up in some of the different presentations. I know Dan Sturdivant a couple months ago talked about different images of peace, particularly in the Christian tradition. Sarah, you've mentioned a little bit here in your presentation at the beginning as well. So I wanted to explore that of, what is it that we mean when we talk about peace? So I wanted to start with just a couple of common phrases that we have in our English language, our tradition. So here's a couple that I came up with. We use the phrase at peace, which of course means being free from anxiety or distress. We also have, that can be at peace means that someone who is dead, they've died and they've escaped the difficulties of life. So that's one phrase that we commonly use. Another phrase we heard is to hold one's peace, and that's to remain silent about something. That maybe we want to say something, but we hold our peace, so we're quiet, we keep it in. Another common phrase is keeping the peace, and that's to refrain or to prevent others from disturbing the civil order. And we talk about the police keeping the peace, and others play that role in our culture and society as well. And then finally, we have the phrase make peace. which is about reestablishing relationships, getting reconciled. The example here is maybe making peace with a family member or a friend. So that's another phrase that we sometimes use. So I thought about those and tried to come up with something that we could kind of get our hands around that might come from my particular tradition. So another thing I thought of in doing that was what I'm going to call the continuum of peace. And we've heard this talked about a little bit already. And as I thought about it, on one side, you've got what we might call inner or personal peace. This is something very much in our own being. People talk about being at peace, at feeling peaceful. And then on the other continuum, on the other side, is I think what Shaheen was talking about, of more of this image of world and global peace. How do we bring the nations together? How do we find a way to come about this peace that encompasses all of the world? And as I wrestled with this, I thought, well, where do we try to focus on this? And to me, I think there can be issues with both of these. I think on one side, our inner peace can be criticized as being navel gazing, right? That we're only focused on our own need, on our own situation. We're not aware of what's going on around us. So it can be very, in some ways, self-indulgent to be focused on our inner peace. On the other side, world peace can often mean domination by one particular empire. You think of the example of the Pax Romana, over almost 200 years of what was seen as a time of peace in the Mediterranean world, most of the known world at that time. And yet it was a brutal peace. There were obviously millions of people who were living under very difficult circumstances. So the question is, if we go towards global peace, can that also lead us to a situation where we have one dominant power, but we don't really have much sense of freedom or connection with one another? Instead, it's imposed upon us. So again, this, for me, recognized the difficulty of trying to talk about that question of, how do we bring about peace in our world? So what I want to do is to talk a little bit about peace from a particular point of view, from my own particular place of faith rooted in this Presbyterian faith and tradition. And this was a quote I came across just a couple of days ago, and I thought this was a good, helpful way to kind of get introduced to it. And let me just read this for us, and you guys can think about it a little bit. It says, if you ask a Presbyterian to define peace, you'll get lots of answers, and they're mostly all correct. That peace is tranquility and calm and quiet and respect and all those things that we ask of our children, at least for a few blessed moments every now and then. Peace is well-being, wholeness, health, safety, security, civility, and all those things we expect from our communities. Peace is diplomatic treaties, international accords, global conventions, mutual aid, disaster relief, and all those things that create understanding among nations. Peace finds its expression in many ways, takes on a variety of forms, and is evident in both the most intimate and the most expansive parts of life. And then finally, as people of faith, we believe peace in all of its expressions and all of its forms is a gift from God. So that's kind of the foundation. And what I want to do in the next few minutes here is to look at the biblical meanings of peace. So when we look in for Christians, if we're looking in the New Testament, which was written mostly in Greek, and then we go back to the Hebrew scriptures that were written in Hebrew, we find some words, some concepts around what we translate into English as peace. And I just want to take a little time and do a little word study on these to get a sense of what roots us into this understanding of peace, and then maybe also to get some understanding of how we might be a little bit hopeful for peace being possible in our world today. So we'll start with the New Testament. And in the New Testament, the Greek word that we translate most clearly as peace is the word irene, and you see it written there both transcribed and in the Greek text. So phonetically, irene is the word. And there's also a Greek god named Irene that is the god of peace. And so this is the noun that is translated most times in the New Testament. So the Gospels, the writings of Paul's, and some of the other epistles, where we get the word peace. And as we'll talk about in a little bit, it's used also to translate the Hebrew word shalom, which we're going to talk about in the Greek version of the Old Testament. And it's used about 94 different times. So fairly common, but there are other concepts that are used more often, but it's certainly a pretty well-known word in the New Testament. When we go to the Hebrew scriptures, the Hebrew word shalom, probably one that I think most of us are familiar with in our culture, is again a noun, and it's a word that means peace and wholeness, and there's more to it, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we get into it. That is used about 225 times, although there are different cognates of the same word, so it's a pretty common and familiar term throughout the Hebrew scriptures that we see. So let's jump in for a little bit in the New Testament in the Greek word irene. So it's derived from a Greek verb that means to join or to bind together that which has been separated. All right. So if you can literally get a picture of something holding a group of things together, maybe a group of of sticks or poles or something that are bound together, things that have broken apart. So at the root of this word of peace in the New Testament is a bringing back together. And one commentator mentioned that the meaning can be conveyed by this expression of having it all together. So bringing things together that have been separated. All right. So that's the kind of the root meaning in the New Testament of this word that we have. There's a couple more places that we see it and see the use of the word. So peace can mean good accord or absence of conflict. We see this in the book of Acts, where the high priest Ananias describes a relationship between Judea and Rome as one of peace. And that's one where this word is used, that there's a sense of good accord. In Matthew 10, peace is described there as an absence of conflict between family members. So that's a common understanding that we may have for that word. But we also find that peace can be a virtue. In Romans 8, Paul talks about peace being the virtue of thinking of the spiritual rather than of the fleshly things. And again, that reminds me a little bit of what Shaheen just said about the difference between the animal and the spiritual, that we see this trying to bring these two together. So you see a commonality there. And then in the letter of 1 Peter, peace is doing good rather than evil. So again, it's a virtue that a person or a community has. We also see peace described in the New Testament as a theological attribute. So there's talk of a God of peace and the peace of God and the gospel of peace. So that's an attribute of the divine. And then finally, the word is used commonly as a greeting. That it's an opening greeting. It's, instead of saying welcome, it's a word that's used often to start a conversation. And we see that in a number of different places in Paul's letters in particular. So this is kind of the New Testament kind of image or background, some of the depth of this image of peace that we see. So we turn to the Hebrew scriptures. We have the word shalom. And again, that's one I think that's probably familiar to us. And I want to share a quote that I found about the word that I thought was pretty helpful in getting some understanding of this. And here's what this author said. It said, shalom is a Hebrew word often used in the scriptures to mean peace. But that's correct only if you consider it correct to call the Grand Canyon a large crack in the ground, or if you want to call the Pacific Ocean a large pool of water. Shalom is much more than just a large term. There is likely as much residual breadth and depth of the meaning of shalom as there is the residual expanse and residual water in the meaning of the aforementioned examples. So not only does shalom express much more than peace, but the kind of peace shalom represents is active and engaged, going far beyond the mere absence of conflict. So again, you see the similarity, but I think in the Hebrew scriptures, in this term, the word shalom is a broader and deeper understanding of what we might think of when we use our word peace. And I'm just going to talk quickly a few more examples here that we see some different flavors of the word. So when you hear shalom in the Hebrew scriptures, it can mean material well-being and prosperity. Okay, we see it in Genesis 37. Jacob sends his son Joseph back to check on the shalom of his brothers. He wants to know that they're doing well, that they're being prosperous. And then in Psalm 38, a lack of shalom, a lack of health and bodily strength is often the result of God's judgment. So you see it as a sense of well-being. But there's also in the word the sense of justice, that good relationships between nations, groups, friends, and family are part of this sense of shalom, and that requires justice. So in Isaiah 60, shalom is very much a synonym for righteousness, for a right relationship with God. You can't have one without the other. The example in Joshua 19, Joshua 9, when Joshua makes a treaty with the Gibeonites, it is called a time of shalom. So again, the good relationships between the nations. And then finally, Jeremiah 20, where Jeremiah's friends are called men of shalom. So men of good relationship. There's a close bond between them. Shalom can also, though, mean morality, a straightforward ethical integrity. So there's a sense of wholeness there. It's the opposite of being deceitful. So in Zechariah 8, judgments are made on the basis of truth, and they make for shalom. So when there are good judgments made, when the king and those in control or those in power make good ethical and have integrity, then there is a sense of shalom. And then in 2 Kings 5, Elisha says to Naaman, who has been healed, who is the foreigner, the outsider, he tells him to go in shalom, to go with integrity and to go forward. And then finally, like in the New Testament, the word shalom is also a greeting, a word of peace. So it kind of opens up a conversation and a relationship. So those are the two kind of areas that we see in the Old Testament. And what I want to do is to talk a little bit, just briefly, about, what do we do with this? Where does this possibly take us? So one of the things that we talk about in our Presbyterian denomination is peacemaking. So this understanding that if we have this knowledge, this sense of what peace is, and we begin to experience it, then part of what we are called to do as a community of faith, as a church, is to put it into practice, is to somehow make peace a reality in our own particular neighborhoods, relationships, and world. So we have a larger denominational Presbyterian peacemaking program, and the quote here is from one of their documents from a couple years back, and it says this. It says, "Peace is the intended order of the world with life abundant for all God's children. Peacemaking, therefore, is the calling of the Christian church. For Christ is our peace, is the one who made us." So those of us who identify as part of the Christian faith recognize that we can't just think or talk about peace, but there's a calling there. There's a vocation to create these situations of peace. And the three little bullet points down here are some of the things that this Presbyterian peacemaking program has been focused on over the past couple years. One is to look at new approaches to active peacemaking, especially as we have been in this situation the past couple of years with the pandemic, and the way we have done things as a community of faith has really just kind of turned over completely. So there's an opportunity here, hopefully. The second item is the call to equip God's people to be compassionate and prophetic peacemakers. So often it's stepping out maybe in uncomfortable places. And then third, finally, and I think this talks to our gathering today, is connect communities of peace to learn from each other in shared accompaniment and to take action together for the transformation of the world. So again, there's a call there to do it together with other faith communities and not just sticking to one particular group. All right, I've got one more piece to share here, and then we will we'll have our closing song and prayer, and then I'll open it up for questions. So this comes from an article by the Old Testament professor Walter Brueggemann. Some of you who may be familiar with him, he's written a lot of these issues around these concepts that we find in the Hebrew scriptures. And I just wanted to kind of pull this out of this article. I thought it was an interesting way to think about peace. So Brueggemann says this, he said, peace and its related attitudes and behaviors do not add up to a code of conduct. And I think by that he means you can't just reduce it to a simple set of rules. Do these three things. So peace is more, there's more to it. It's a much more complex issue. He also says peace is not simply, it should be a plea that we all get along. Okay, there's something deeper. There's more than just getting along. Peace is not settling for the golden mean or the lowest common denominator. Peace is not the avoidance of issues that may cause conflict, which I think is something we probably face in our faith communities occasionally, that sense of just leave things be and we'll all be at peace. He goes on to say this, peace is rather a vision of a life of gracefulness that is lived in response to the gracefulness of God. So there's a sense of that vision of seeing something we're trying to attain, but also is lived in response to what God is calling us to. Peace is an offer of the self in fidelity for the sake of the community. So a way it's a giving up of something of ourselves for the larger good. And then finally, peace is the recognition that all of our best convictions are penultimate and finally must yield to the presence of the neighbor. So again, there's a sense there that sometimes we have to give up something in order to find peace in our community, to welcome our neighbor, and to live peacefully in that way. All right, I'm going to wrap things up here with, this is a hymn by the hymn writer Fred Kahn, Put Peace into Each Other's Hands, and then there'll be a closing prayer after this.
And I, your treasure,
So this closing is titled The Benediction of St. Francis. May God bless you with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that you may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, hunger, and war, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and to turn their pain into joy. And may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in the world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done, to bring justice and kindness to all our children and the poor. Amen. Okay, I'll stop sharing there.
Thank you so much, Reverend Burnham. That may God bless us with discomfort.
I hope I hit my 20 minutes.
If we have been blessed, that's for sure. Oh my goodness, that's very interesting that when we have these trials upon us, it creates a desire and a willingness to go forth and make a difference. Thank you, Shaheen. So this is now your time for those of you attending to make comments of your own or to ask questions of the speakers. We have about 10-15 minutes to do that. So once again, remember to go to the reactions and click on it, and then the hand will go up. And let's see, did I do that right? Raise hand, there you go. So you see my hand is up in the corner over there. Okay, Channing Miller, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, I find that the hand that I put up disappears within 3 seconds.
Yeah, right. Whatever works.
Yeah, I have many questions, but because we didn't have enough time, I'd like to ask Shaheen a question. Hi, Shaheen.
Sure. I'll start.
Hi. Yeah. I know, I made note that you said that Baha'i revelation was coming because to bring the most great peace. That's the purpose of bringing the revelation. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about any vision that the Baha'i faith as to what time frame this great peace is going to be established within.
That's a good question. This time frame is actually, so what Baha'u'llah did is he created a system in which can be done swiftly if implemented. What he has asked us to do is to translate his vision into reality through, similar to how, a cell has DNA and a cell has to read that DNA like a blueprint to turn it into the proteins that are necessary for that cell to function. By studying his revelation and by implementing it in our lives, it can be done organically as quickly as or as slowly as our own will. So it could have been established in his own lifetime, but that generation chose to imprison Baha'u'llah rather than let him flourish, in the sense of, imagine if he wrote these things under imprisonment, what he could have been able to help serve humanity if we actually embraced him. This same goes with the teachings of Christ. Christ, in the 3 years of his ministry, was able to transform the hearts of people to such a degree that even 2,000 years, we are still invoking his name, right? So that's the power of the manifestation. If he was allowed even 3 more years, imagine how much more we could have gained as a civilization. So to go back to that question though, generally that in this particular dispensation, we have a series of plans that are set up by what's called the Universal House of Justice. And right now we are in a new 25-year plan. Before that, we were in another series of plans, and each of these has sub-plans. And as humanity progresses in stages, they will increase the goals of the Baha'i world in terms of its outward-looking vision to help unify the human race. And so the timetable that is put is dependent on the world's affairs. And we understand that as this current world civilization is crumbling, this world order, if you will, Baha'u'llah says that simultaneously a new world order will be put up in its place. If you think about how you will roll up a carpet while simultaneously laying a new carpet down, this is already happening. And it's already happening. There has been 10,000 conferences that are happening right now worldwide, 50 of which are in California, that there are Baha'is who are reaching out within their own communities and taking people, saying, you know, we have children, we have youth, what kind of programs can we put in place to ensure their health, their mental stability, their spiritual refinement, so that they can go out and actually have the tools to do these things. It's all there. It's all there. And it will take generations maybe, but all the requisites are there. As you train your children and grandchildren, and as I train my nieces and etc., we are all really just one generation away from that, aren't we? What we do is we keep prolonging that generation back more and more.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Channing?
Well, I could have a separate conversation with Shaheen
Right.
about that. I don't want to take up too much time, but
Right.
thank you so
Okay.
much.
Okay, thank you. So are there any other comments or questions or personal experiences with peace in a personal way or social way? Any
Can I go again, Sarah?
sure, yeah.
I don't see any other hands up. So anyway, I just wanted to say, Reverend Burnham, thank you so much. I really appreciated your presentation, especially the music and the walk through the scriptures, you know, historically, to really see where peace is, you know, amongst the Old and New Testament. And also the words to the song in the beginning and the end really instructed me personally on how to behave, how to be in the world. And so that was really helpful for me a lot. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Channing.
Thank you, Channing.
Sunshine.
Well,
Oh, we lost you. Oh, there you are.
there. Well, I just wanted to add to pretty much what in line of what Channing was saying. Reverend Burnham, I wanted to thank you for what you said, because I was one of the people originally who just wanted to ask the question, is peace possible? And I think both of you today not only answered it in a way that I accept the possibility of peace, even though historically we have a lot of questionable looks at it. But if you look at it by definition, you gave quite a large positive rendition that we can see peace almost in every corner, past, present, and future happening. And when we don't see it, we can see it as a challenge to make it happen, especially in the benediction of St. Francis. But I guess I wanted to also comment that Shaheen, your metaphor, I guess, about the new world order happening as the world order crumbles like laying of new carpet was a very good visual, and certainly leaves me with a lot of hope just in that vision. So thank you very much for your speech.
May I say something?
Sure.
Baha'u'llah says that this peace is actually inevitable. If something is desired by God, is it not inevitable? The timeline, so there's two forces in the world, in existence. One is the will of God, and the other is the will of man. The will of man is given to us by God so that we're not puppets. And Baha'u'llah says that we have entered a stage of maturity, mankind as a whole. And this attainment of maturity, the fruit of that attainment one of the fruits is world peace.
Hmm.
He says that in a sense, the manifestations of God can project. They're not limited to the time and generation that they live. They can look generations beyond. They're in fact the originators of our own progress and development. He says, yet so it shall be, and I'm just cutting it down so I don't talk too much. Yet so it shall be, these fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come.
Wow. Great.
Thank you. I really appreciate the hopefulness that both of our speakers today have presented us with. Any other, Robert, you have a question or a comment?
And Dick Powell has his hand up.
Oh, Dick, okay, thank you, Dick, yeah. Robert, go ahead.
Oh, well, it seems to me that, every generation learns truth anew. And you were talking about maybe we could have achieved peace in the generation where Baha'i was imprisoned, but we all are have this opportunity each life, each generation to have a new vision. And it seems to me like peace is a verb. And I really like the thought that Mark had that because God gives us the grace, we could kind of use that grace and become God's hands to move it forward. So I'm just sort of reflecting on the importance of seeing peace as a verb and taking it into our own hands to move it forward.
Thank you, Robert. Dick Powell? You're muted. Dick, you're muted.
Okay, relative to the two forces in the world, there's a third force that's really needed and much more powerful, and that's women, not just men. It's women. Our teacher Thich Nhat Hanh brought creative mindfulness to have a way of people practicing what you needed to live in peace together, but needed it to go to the West, but he said it was critical that the women of the West get involved. So I see the third force is the women making it happen, the real bringers of peace and loving and kindness. They know how to do it a lot better than we do.
Actually, thank you for mentioning that, Mr. Powell. It's funny. I actually.
Mr. Powell is my father. I'm Dick. Yeah.
Hello, Dick. So I forgot to mention, but I should have. One of the requisites that Abdu'l-Baha describes is that until the equality of men and women are not, until they're firmly established, the equality of men and women, he likens men and women as two wings of one bird, that they must be equally strong so that this bird can fly and fly straight. And until this equality is understanding that men and women are equal in the eyes of God, until this understanding has not been established, world peace is unattainable. That's a barrier. And he says that, and he gives another thing. He says that when more women are put in office, the likelihood of a woman allowing her son to be sent to war is almost nothing, right? So that's a huge way of prevention of war, is that women inherently understand something that they nurtured and grew and gave birth to, that they would not be willing to have that person be killed. And this is a nurturing force that God especially endowed women. And this is one of the reasons why the equality of men and women are so important in this. And although it has always been, men and women have always been equal in the sight of God, it is in this day, again, it's because of our greater maturation that it is actually, God expects this from us as a standard now. Whereas before he did have expectations only in proportion, he always does, in our own development, but this is the day of maturity of the human race. So God's expectations from us are very high, and he expects us to work for peace. He will not hand it to us as some passive thing. We must earn it. He will give us the tools, but we must put in the work to apply those tools be able to appreciate that peace in which we're building.
Thank you. And thank you, Dick, for bringing up women and their place in peace. I think it's pretty obvious, the role that we play in peacemaking. And there are more and more women leaders in the world, and there are more and more women coming forth who are willing to run for office because they see their place in the whole picture. So we've almost reached, we have reached 2 participants. Have anybody else? Let's see, Will McGarvey, you've got your hand up, and Robert Esch, is your hand still up, or is that from a former? You can go to the reactions and say, put the hand down too.
I was looking for the picture to share, but it's I'm not able to find it right now, but it's a picture from one of our Presbyterian magazines, and it has a picture of an aging balding man, and it says peacemaking in the world. You don't need an AR-15. All you need is to pack one of these babies, and it's a picture of a Presbyterian.
Oh yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Reverend Burnham and Shaheen, for your preparation, your energy, your thoughts. It's just it's so rich. And thank you so much for all of you coming and joining us and offering your thoughts too. The dialogue is always something that is, I think, really valuable. It's as valuable as what the speakers have to say, is the conversations that happen between us. So we look forward to seeing you next month, 3rd Monday, and hope you will all be well for the coming month.
And our friend Steve Albert does have a picture he wants to share.
Oh, is this food, Steve? Are you going to offer us food again?
Let me get you set up to share. There you go. Oh, it's sugar-free and gluten-free and calories-free. Oh my.
Is this real food? Oh. Thank you, Steve. It must be dinner time, because you continually enjoy thinking about food. That's very funny. Thank you. Okay,
Sarah,
yes.
who is on the agenda for next month?
My schedule is in the other room, and I can't remember who it is. It might be Nazir Islam. And
I have it right here.
Okay, yes, that's a good idea.
Just to whet people's appetite.
Yes.
That would be Father Tom Bonacci
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
and Nazir Ahmed. It was
Beautiful.
Interesting combination, right?
Beautiful combination. Nazir is a rocket scientist and an Islam, and Father Bonacci, I think some of you have heard of him. So please join us on, I think that's June, what is that? June 18th. Anyway, I'll send out a notice, and we will enjoy every moment of the next coming month with a peaceful thought in our hearts and our minds, and do good peace. Thank you all so much.
June